All right, good people. Hope everyone's doing great. We are back with another episode, and what is the final episode of what we've been affectionately calling the relaunch of the Wrapped in Skin podcast. This is episode 10. I'm your host, Justin Jamar Grooms, and as always, can't thank you enough for listening to me and rocking with us this whole season. It's been an amazing opportunity to talk to you about some things that have been on my spirit for quite some time. Some things that I've been wanting to unpack in a multitude of ways. So this is, selfishly kind of giving me the opportunity to do this. And along the way, I think I've been able to help some people wherever they are and wherever they may find themselves in this season of their life. And I want to continue to do so with this episode. This being the final one, I want to always try to attack some topics that may be discussed, but may not be discussed in the ways that I've been discussing them throughout the course of this season. So this will be the last episode for probably like 4 weeks. And then we're going to do some pretty exciting things coming back for season 3 and adding some additional content, some more ripples and wrinkles, and then adding some video as well. So again, I can't thank you all enough for those who've been on this journey with us, this kind of scrappy kind of podcast we've been doing, because really all I wanted to do was to talk about issues, and not necessarily issues, but talk about topics that people wanted to hear about, and the extra and all that stuff that comes along with some podcasts. Sometimes that I wanted to kind of eliminate that and cut straight through to what people really wanted to hear and what people were concerned about. One thing I realized is that life is hard, and there are a lot of questions around the human condition, right? There's a lot of frustration that happens in our lives as individuals as we try to pursue whatever it is that we're pursuing, whether it be family, friendship, relationships, careers, whatever it is. Life gets tough, right? It gets tough, it gets difficult, and oftentimes we find ourselves frustrated and searching for answers for a multitude of things. And while I'm not in any position to say that I have all the answers, or even, a fraction of the answers, what I do spend my time doing is trying to sit with God and get revelation on the things that he would give me revelation for. And I feel honored when I get some sort of insight or revelation into my own personal journey. And I can, again, use this platform to talk about those personal revelations, in the hopes that even though those are personal revelations, that you may be able to glean something from them and apply them to your own life, right? I think most of the time our frustration as humans often begins with this inability to answer a simple question, right? We can trace most things, or most sources of our frustration go back to one iteration or another of this fundamental human question. And that question is, why am I here? Right? So you can even add to that and say, not only why am I here, but where did I come from and who sent me here? Right? That's a fundamental human question. And again, I think it becomes the source of a lot of our frustration. We mask it with other things, but it all boils down to that one fundamental question. Whether we're frustrated with our relationships, with our careers, with our day-to-day activities, it comes down to this deep sense of, what is it all for? What is it all happening for? Is it happening to me? Is it happening for me? Is it happening because of me? There's this question that somewhere throughout our day, most of us ask ourselves it in one way, shape, form, or fashion. Well, I think I've got some good news for you. I've got good news and bad news. Let me just say that. I'll go ahead and hit you with the good news first. I think it's always best to start with good news first. The good news is that the answers you seek are extremely close. Right? So close that you wake up and go to sleep with the answers every single day, because the answers are within you. That's the good news. So close you can touch them, right? But the bad news is the journey that you have to undertake in order to get to the answers. The journey that is a journey within yourself is one of the most challenging journeys that you can ever undertake. Now that sounds Kind of crazy that getting to know yourself and deep diving into who you are is one of the most difficult journeys that you can ever undertake. The reason for that is because on this journey, you will have doubt. You have to wade through deep reservoirs of doubt, deep reservoirs of fear, shame, guilt, misunderstanding, societal norms, societal expectations, feelings of insecurity. You'll have to wade through all that in order to get to those answers. It's oftentimes so much more comforting to just look outside of ourselves for the answers. That way, we can place blame elsewhere for our life's misfortune. It feels better to shrug off the responsibility of discovering yourself, possibly for the first time, and uncovering the purpose that's attached to your life. Because once you do that, now there's a responsibility attached to it. If it's society's fault, if it's your parents' fault, if it's the church's fault, if it's your significant other's fault, then you can put that responsibility on them and you don't have to take control of it. And I want you to hear me clearly on this, really clearly. Turn up your radio if you're listening to this in the car. Take a beat and listen to this. You have to take your power back. Stop giving people the authority to dictate your life. Now you may be saying, Justin, what do you mean by that? What is this? What does that have to do with me giving my power away or taking my power back? This is where it's about to get real. Like the rubber's going to meet the road in this episode. Look, God is hard to comprehend. And I say hard, and that's not even encompassing what it is to try to comprehend God. It's almost impossible to comprehend God, so much so that I don't believe we have the capacity or the capability to understand and comprehend the full weight and nature of God. So let me go ahead and say this right now, that any individual, any organization, any group, any person out there who says to you that they understand fully and completely the nature of God is at best misguided, and at worst intentionally misleading people. I'm gonna say it one more time just so you can hear that clearly. That any one individual or any group of people or any organization who proclaims to know fully the nature and the character of God is at best misguided and at worst misleading people. How dare we put God in such a small box? And by the way, let me just go ahead and say this. The average human uses about 15% of their brain capacity. Not because they don't want to use the rest of it. It's because we haven't learned how to unlock the rest of it. Now, some of us use more of our capacity than others, but for the most part, we don't even know the fullness of our own capabilities, let alone a divine creator who created a universe that we cannot even comprehend. We can't begin to comprehend the creation of the creator, let alone the creator. I'll go a little bit deeper here, right? Let's say you could comprehend half of who and what God is. The relationship that he has with you is individual. So when people try to tell you, you should behave this way with God, or you should treat God this way, or you should respond this way to God, they're telling you out of their own personal experience and personal relationship with God. And this is coming from someone who is sharing with you my own personal revelations. And the reason I'm saying this to you is because I don't want you to misconstrue what this is and what this podcast is and what I'm talking about. Everything I'm giving to you is based on my personal revelation and my personal experiences with God. And my hope has always been that there's something in it that sparks your interest, that you can relate to, that then you can go and meditate on it and get with God so that he can start to cultivate a personal relationship with you and you a personal relationship with him. Whatever you get from this podcast and whatever I say is simply so you can start the conversation with God and get the knowledge for yourself. It has nothing to do with me, and it has everything to do with God. I am only trying to operate as the catalyst so that you can go and see what more God has for you, or what he has for you as an individual in your personal relationship. Because hear this, the closest we will ever get to knowing the true nature of God is knowing our own personal nature. And I'm telling you, the majority of us, the overwhelming majority of humans walking this planet, have not even scratched the surface into uncovering who they are as individuals. So let's start there. Let's create this atmosphere where it's okay to find out who you are as an individual. It's okay not to be like anyone else. It's okay not to fit into societal norms. It's okay to be confused at times. It's okay to have some fear at times, some shame at times, some guilt at times, because when you experience those things, it gives you a reason and an opportunity to discover more. Press in. Why am I feeling this way? Why are these things manifesting this way in my life at this time? Is there something I'm supposed to glean from it? Now, I'm not saying you can't go and sit with people and get counseling and get instruction from people that you love and you trust, and go to church and commune together. But at the end of the day, the fullness of God is incomprehensible. And your hope should be that I want to know what God would have me do. I want to know what he wants my relationship with him to be like on a personal level. I don't want to compare my relationship to Justin's relationship with God. I want to know exactly what my relationship is supposed to look like. I tweeted this the other day. I didn't tweet it because I don't really tweet like that, but it's called X now, by the way. But I put this on Threads, and it was something to the effect of a divine creator only creates divine things. Now I want you to sit with that for just a second. If you believe that God is your creator and that he created you out of the dust of the earth and he breathed life into you and he is divine, then how in the world is a piece of that divinity not inside of you? It's almost impossible. If you believe that your source is holistically divine, it's impossible that you are sharing in that divinity. You know, some people will say, how dare you call yourself divine? What do you mean, how dare I call myself divine? I dare call myself divine because I understand from whom I emanate from. Now, if you don't believe you came from God, this may be a different conversation for you. But if you are of the full belief that your existence is completely predicated on God creating, shaping, forming you, and sending you into this world, then there is a piece of that divinity in you. Now, however big that piece becomes is totally up to you. How you cultivate it, how much attention you pay to it, how much you get to know that divinity, which is your own personal nature, is totally up to you. But the moment that you shrug off that responsibility and give it over to someone else, then you've defaulted. You've essentially told God that I would rather learn about someone else's relationship with you than to find out what mine is supposed to be. Because in the development of that relationship, you will start to receive instruction about your purpose, about your gifts, about your talents, about where you can deploy those things that were already inside of you when you entered into this physical space. I don't know about you, but there's always been certain things that frustrate me. I mean, and the buzzword of today is trigger. I won't quite use that word, but there are some things that frustrate me, you know, whether it be things I hear people say or things that people do. And I'm just using this for an example. There's been things that I'm like, well, I don't like that. And so what I've done is, from a kid, I'd go to other people and ask them, does that upset you, or are you angry about that? And not to be so non-descriptive, I'll give you an example of it. So when I was about 15, 16 years old, you all know this. I was raised in the church. I knew a lot of biblical principles. But one thing that always frustrated me about how people talked about Jesus Christ is that they would say things like they would talk about Jesus Christ as if he was here in present form. And that frustrated me. And I asked someone one day, like, why do people talk about Jesus as if he still exists, as if he still walks the earth? And a pastor said, well, he does exist. And I said, well, no, well, where is he? He said, well, he's not physically here. He's here in the form of the Holy Spirit. And even at the young age of like 15, I remember saying to him, well, why don't we just say that? Why don't we reference the Holy Spirit instead of mentioning the name of Jesus Christ? And now I won't go too deep into the biblical context in the religious realm, but I will say that the look on his face was a little perplexing. And as a young person who was looking up to someone who knew more about the Bible and who I assumed knew more about God than I did, it caused me to kind of shrink a little bit and just kind of put it to the back burner. But it was always gnawing at me. Every time I would hear someone say it, it would gnaw at me. And it wasn't until I became a fully grown adult that I realized it was God that was allowing that to trigger me. Right? There was something in my purpose and my design and my makeup which allowed that thing to frustrate me. And God was saying, why are you not saying anything about it? And what I would say was, well, I talked to the pastor about it. This is the answer he gave me. And then one day God said, are you comfortable with that answer? Are you fulfilled and content with the answer that you were given? And my response was no, I'm not comfortable with it. And then we'll do something about it was the response I got back. And again, not in a combative way, but in an exploratory way. Start to understand, what is it? Why is it this thing that I don't really believe it that way? Right. And so I think what we do, and I use that as an example, it's a real thing. It really happened, and it really frustrated me, but it forced me to explore, and it forced me to study, and it forced me to look into myself, but also lean on God for understanding. But I use that to say that you can be getting some great advice, and you can be getting some great insight and wisdom. But if there's ever something that doesn't seem right to you, never let a person or a group of people tell you that you can't question that thing. Because if you have a question, there's a reason for the question. Don't ignore the questions. The questions are simply prompts for you to go deeper. And if you act as if you don't have the question, and you act as if you're comfortable with things that you're not comfortable with, you will not search for understanding. You will start to treat God as a dictator who says to you, do as I say and not as I do. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll go back to what I said before. If a divine creator created you, there's a piece of that divinity within you. The true character and nature of God is embedded in your DNA. Now, the fullness of God, as I said at the beginning of this, will never be completely understood. But what is a better way to start to explore a portion of the nature of God than to explore yourself? Because there is a piece of the nature of God inside of you. And you can search outside of yourself all day long, but that is such a heavier and more difficult undertaking. It requires way more mental energy to lean on things outside of yourself for understanding. Now, as I said, the journey in yourself is difficult. But it's difficult because sometimes you have to overcome social conditioning. But once you make up in your mind that where God lives is on the inside of you, you will stop searching for it out in the world. And the quicker you stop searching for it out in the world, the quicker you can start searching for it within yourself. And the quicker you can get on a personal basis with God. And he will start to deposit certain things into you. And you'll start to have a richness in that relationship. You'll start to intuitively do what it is that God is telling you to do. You'll start to believe those instincts and those things that are rising up within you You'll stop questioning your intuition. You'll stop leaning on people for understanding and start leaning completely on him for understanding. You won't be fearful of questioning things that don't make sense to you, whether they be concepts, biblical principles, ideas that you've been taught as a child, in school, in society, in your family. When you have those questions, you know from whence they come. They come from within, and what's within? God is within. So if that question comes up, that question came directly from God. I think I've told this story before on an earlier episode. I may have not told the whole story, but back it's been about 13 years ago now. I lost an aunt. This was someone who played a pivotal role in my life from a young age. She was really instrumental in guiding me into manhood. Honestly, she was young enough to relate to the things I was going through, but also old enough to give me some wisdom and insight. And I was living in LA and had been contemplating whether or not I should move back home. And I had a conversation with her one time, and I was saying, look, I think I should come back home. Like, I don't want to be away from. I think y'all need me. She was like, no, I think you need to do what God has for you, and you need to do what God has purposed you and designed you to do. Now, my difficulty, and I didn't tell her this, was I didn't believe that I was currently doing what God had purposed and designed me to do. I was operating in my flesh, and I was seeking some sort of affirmation or confirmation from the outside world. With the way I was living my life and the things I was pursuing had nothing to do with God, although I was trying to convince myself that they did. So I had that conversation with her, and she said, don't you dare come home because of us. Like, we're good. All right. Fast forward a few months later, tragically and unexpectedly, she passed away. Now, I've had a lot of loss in my life, and that one, not any more difficult than the others, but there was a certain lingering pain that I couldn't quite get through. I couldn't even connect with it. I can't even hardly describe what it meant to get that phone call, right? And so I'm on the plane flying home, for the funeral, and I'm completely out of it. So I'm starting to read the book of Job, and because that's all I knew to read. Because as a kid, I'm like, I know if somebody in the Bible was going through stuff, it's Job. Job went through some stuff, and I was always taught that Job never questioned God. He just took it. He never questioned why all these things were happening to him. He just continued to praise God, and that's what I was told. But as I'm reading this book as an adult on the plane, it suddenly made sense to me why I had questions. Because the idea that Job didn't question is not true. He did question. He did wonder why he was going through all those things. He did ask God for clarity. He did at one point want to die and not want to be here anymore. And I remember sitting on that plane and getting this sense of relief over knowing that it's okay to have questions. It's okay to not believe certain things that you've been taught. It's okay to not believe fully in the wisdom that people have been pouring into you for years and decades and your entire life. It's okay. Because what God is doing in you is a new thing. What God does with you daily is a new thing. It's your thing. It's not anybody else's to go through. So if no one else has gone through exactly what I'm going through, how can I not have a question? I should have questions. The problem comes up when you suppress the question. Because if you suppress the question, there is no answer. And where there is no answer, there is frustration. And this takes us right back to the beginning of this episode when I said the most frustrating thing that we have to encounter as human beings is lingering questions about why we exist, what we're purposed to do, who sent us here, and what we're supposed to do with this thing called life. And it is not a corporate answer. What you're supposed to do with your life is what you're supposed to do with your life. The way you're supposed to behave is the way you're supposed to behave. Your relationship with God is your relationship with God, and don't let anyone tell you any different. Stop apologizing for asking. Stop apologizing for not fully understanding. Stop apologizing for not completely comprehending the full nature of this divine creator. Now, I use this kind of in a facetious manner, but if you think about it this way, I read this book when I was probably about 5 or 6 years ago. I read this book. A friend of mine gave it to me. She's listening. She knows exactly who she is. This is a French book that had been translated into English, and it's called The Empire of the Ants. It's an incredible book. If you've ever read the book, you know. If you haven't read the book, you should go check it out. And I won't give you all the details of the book, but basically, it is looking into the lives of ants, and it's giving them human characteristics. And it was so strange when she recommended this book to me, because when I was young, I was obsessed with ant farms, and I had an ant farm early on, but my mom didn't let me keep it because black moms ain't trying to let you have ant farms and ants get out of the house. You know how that go. But I was obsessed with ant farms. And one of the reasons I was obsessed with ant farms was because I always wondered, do they know we're watching? Like, do they know that we're here? What are they thinking about every day? The most interesting thing I think about ants is that they never stop moving. That has nothing to do with this conversation, but if you see an ant still, something's wrong with it, right? So they never stop moving. But again, that has nothing to do with this conversation. But I used to think, man, do they know that we are watching them? And what are they thinking about us? And that was always a lingering question. And as I bring this episode to a close, I want you to imagine how ridiculous it would be that one ant who catches a glimpse of a human through the glass of the ant farm, how ridiculous it would be for that ant to go back to another ant and say, hey, you see that thing out there? I know what it is. I know what it's thinking. I know what it wants us to do. I know how it interacts with other things like it. I know all about it. How ridiculous that sounds is equally as ridiculous as it sounds for us to claim to know the full nature of God. Now, I'm not saying we're ants. Obviously, we have a different level of intelligence. But as much as we're not ants, God is not us. So the size of our life compared to the size of an ant life pales in comparison to the size of our life in comparison to the size of God. And the level of understanding that ant has about the human being on the outside of the ant farm is almost the same level of understanding that we have about the divine creator who is and always will be and ever was. Right? So again, why wouldn't you have questions? The good news, and this is what I'm here to tell you, the good news is that your creator will talk back to you. He may not talk back to you audibly, but you will understand if you spend time with him what it is he's having you do. But don't you dare give that responsibility to anybody else. Don't you dare shrink under the weight of misunderstanding. Don't you dare shrink under the weight of doubt. You push in. The moment you feel doubt or insecurity, you push in. You find out, where's this coming from? What do you want me to learn from this? What am I supposed to gain? And ultimately, why am I here? Why did you see fit? Out of everybody that could have ever existed, we've all heard how improbable it is for life to be here, for one individual to be here. How many sperm, the likelihood that that particular sperm is going to fertilize that egg. We've all heard those statistics and how uncommon life is. And you're here. And there is a reason. And with that reason, there is revelation. And I hope that something in these last 10 episodes have sparked you, has set a flame inside of you that has forced you to journey within and connect with God on a level that you've never connected with him before. I love you. I appreciate you. And remember, for this time, while you're wrapped in the skin, you will be, if you choose it to be so, the very best of God. Y'all be good. Merry Christmas. Take care of yourselves. And we'll talk soon. That's a wrap for this episode, pun intended. I want to thank you for joining us. We hope that you learned something about yourself. Hopefully you heard something that you had otherwise never thought of in that way. We welcome your comments. Please share, subscribe, talk about this with your friends. Our goal is to talk next time about something that you want to hear specifically. So comment, message us, email us. Let us know what you want to hear, what you want us to talk about, what you thought about this episode. And we'll catch you next time. It'll be good.